Welcome to another episode of Grace Under Pressure, where my guest today is Adrian Gostick. I'll tell you all about Adrian in just a moment. Anyway, as you know, this LinkedIn Live interview show poses questions to thought leaders and doers like Adrian, whose ideas and actions are helping us come to a greater understanding of ourselves and the greater opportunities that await us. Grace Under Pressure reveals what's too often called the soft stuff, the caring, the commitment, the connecting. Grace for me is the generosity we show others, the respect we give, and the compassion we demonstrate. And when you do it as a leader, especially in challenging times, it's about acquiring that ability to act for others. Welcome, Adrian. It's a pleasure to have you.
Hey, thanks, John. My pleasure.
I want to tell the audience a little bit about you. You are a #1 best-selling author, and you provide real solutions on managing change, driving innovations, and leading high-performance teams. And I can attest to that because I have known Adrian for a long time, and I have talked to many, many clients even before I knew Adrian, and they always spoke favorably of him and his work. He's a global workplace expert, founder of the training and consulting firm, The Culture Works, with his colleague, Chester Elton. They're the author of the New York Times #1 bestseller, USA, Wall Street Journal, All In, The Carrot Principle, and Leading with Gratitude, which is we're going to focus on today. Their works have been translated into 30 languages, and millions of copies have been sold around the world. A leadership expert, he's been called fascinating by Fortune magazine, creative and refreshing by the New York Times. And he's been on the network television shows, including Today Show, CNN, and quoted in The Economist, my favorite magazine, and the Wall Street Journal. He's a top 10 global guru in both leadership and organizational culture. And like me, he is a member of the Marshall Goldsmith 100 Coaches. Welcome, Adrian. Thanks for being on today.
Well, I think after that intro, that's all the time we have. So thanks, everybody.
Yeah, we've got time for one question, I think. So, anyway, as you know, we've talked, executives are under a lot of pressure today. What are you hearing from your clients?
Yeah, boy, there's a lot of issues. Of course, as we know, we're driven to increase sales, to bring down expenses, et cetera. One of the things I'm hearing, since we work mostly in employee engagement and culture, as you know, John, we're hearing a lot about the employee side of things, that we're now 5.5 or so months into this pandemic, and the stress and the anxiety levels are unseen or have never really been seen before in our time. And managers really don't know how to deal with this. My people are starting to burn out. They're starting to, they're not putting in the effort that I need them to. So how do I work through this? I'm hearing a lot of issues surrounding that right now.
What do you think? I mean, obviously, in the obvious, working from home, distant. What's causing the burnout? What are you hearing? So.
A lot of it is coming from uncertainty. If we had an idea, look, we're going to have a vaccine by December, and we're going to, but we don't. And so every day we begin with uncertainty. What's going to happen? Am I going to lose another client? Are they going to back out? Am I going to lose my job? A lot of uncertainty right now we're seeing in the surveys of employees is regarding job security. Am I going to be around in 6 months or 2 months or next week? So we're finding uncertainty is driving a lot of what we're seeing right now. Now, of course, a manager can't erase all uncertainty, but when they start communicating openly and honestly with their people about what we do know and what we're working on and how you can be a part of the solution, a lot of that starts to become more manageable. I know we're going into the dark, but at least we're going in there together.
Interesting. What kinds of things are you hearing from the leaders that you respect? What are they telling their people? So,
one of the things we're hearing, this is really time to focus in on our purpose. If there ever was a time, it's now to really think about why we do what we do. And unfortunately, as times get a little tougher, we tend to want to clamp down more. I read a recent survey that showed more than half of managers become more controlling in tough times. And who wants to be micromanaged? That never created any sort of innovation. So what we have
now.
Exactly. So what we have to do, in a way, you're providing guidance, you're influencing, but you're not micromanaging. So they really are talking about their purpose, why we do what we do. One of the other things that managers, great leaders I'm working with, are also really focusing in on how we can innovate, because you've got to break out of the status quo right now. And unfortunately, the people who were really good for you before the pandemic, those rule followers, those people who did everything by the book, they're probably not much use to you right now because they're sort of paralyzed. Well, what was working, what's always worked isn't working.
Right.
Great leader that we work with, he says, when things go crazy like this, he says, I call my crazies. Those people that are already trying wacky stuff, he says, because they're already have some ideas. And he says, I start sharing those ideas around. You got to get all those rule followers off the porch to try some new things.
That's such a great idea. I like when in times of uncertainty, there isn't a playbook. And so if you're following the playbook, there's not a lot to follow. So I like that. I believe that this is a great time for talent to rise. And I said this before, when just as cream rises in hot coffee, I think crisis produces the next generation of leaders. So
there's no doubt. And what we have to understand, though, is some people, I love managers who tell me, or leaders who tell me, well, we have to get comfortable with the with change, get comfortable with the uncomfortable. Some people never will. And so you've got to help those people, because you're right. Some people will rise, but it's those people who can deal well with uncertainty, creating new business structures or new business processes, et cetera. Some people will never be comfortable in that world. And you've got to provide as much structure as you can. You can't just say, those people, it's my way or the highway, or they've got to get used to this uncertainty. Some people never will. You look at, the NBA playoffs are going on right now. We know that when some of those players go to the line, when the pressure's on, they're going to brick it, and we know that some guys, they just have ice in their veins. And, they're shooting 95% when they're at the line. In these pressure-packed games, we're not all the same. And so we have to understand, and great leaders do this, that they realize, okay, this person I can let run a little bit. Maybe these people need a little bit more care.
You raise a very interesting point, because those super athletes, I always used to say, certainly Tiger Woods in his prime, Tiger Woods lived for Sunday afternoon when the tournament was on the line. Same with Michael Jordan. And those guys, they get their mojo, their drive from being under pressure, but that's not for all of us.
Exactly. And that's where, coming back now to what we're going to chat about is leading with gratitude. The idea is sometimes we feel like an MJ, you don't need to tell him he's done a good job. He knows. He's intrinsically driven. You think of a Tiger Woods. I mean, yeah, it's nice to have the gallery cheering behind him after an amazing shot, but really, he's going to do that no matter what. You're right. He is intrinsically driven. We've got a lot of people who work for us, however, who need that reinforcement. That's where leading with gratitude comes in, is that we've got to reassure our people that they really are making a difference, that they are moving in the right direction, especially in these tough times. We've got to reinforce and reassure people that they're on the right path.
Right. Well, the one thing I like about your book, Leading with Gratitude, and I've heard you and Chester talk about this, is you can afford not to lead with gratitude. Why do you say that? So.
Well, and here we go.
You can hold it up. It's fine.
Well, we actually began this with a friend of ours. You know Marshall Goldsmith very well, like we do. We were sitting around day with Marshall, and we were talking about all the executives we've coached over the years. And one of the things we mentioned is that isn't it funny that every leader that wants to make that leap, they find themselves too busy really for gratitude. And they're not sure why they're not making that leap to that next level. It's just like what you find with grace. It's like, come on, be more compassionate, be more kind. It's one of those sort of no-brainers. And yet we don't do it as managers. We get so busy. So we began with an analysis of, the psychology of why managers aren't doing this. And a lot of it is especially during crisis times, We feel like, well, if there's pressure on my people, they'll perform better. Well, that only lasts for so long. And we're way past that, by the way. When you get to 5 months, if you're still managing through pressure, your people are either getting burned out or they're going to be leaving you as soon as this comes through.
Right.
Now, another one is I just don't have the time for this. I'm so busy myself. What we found in our research, though, is the best managers at this, they typically only spend about an hour a week at being grateful to their people. It wasn't a lot of time, but they had higher levels of customer satisfaction, higher levels of employee engagement, less turnover, all those things we're looking for. So, yeah, you're right. We began with really understanding why managers weren't. And what we found was that this really is a little bit of stupidity on our part, is that we're not seeing the value that's being created around us. And by doing that, we're creating a little bit of animosity in our people that they just don't feel valued.
What is so enlightening about your book is that it's so obvious. And I mean that in the sense that what you're asking people to do to show gratitude, it's not rocket science, and it's just as you said, the pushback is, I don't have time or I don't think it matters. Well, it does. And I think so. What are people telling you about gratitude now in time of crisis? So.
Yeah, and that's it's a good question, because again, you'd think, oh my gosh, we could do this in a quick magazine article, say thanks more. But that's actually not what we found. We found that the best managers, and we interviewed dozens and dozens of CEOs of really successful organizations like Alan Mulally, retired of Ford Motor Company, Ken Chenault, who the week he retired from American Express, 16 years in the seat there, Hubert Joly, who led Best Buy from $1 billion deficit to $1 billion profit. So we interviewed these amazing CEOs, and what they told us was that gratitude is actually more complex than we think it is, because we think it's, okay, I'll just say thank you. And actually general praise has very little impact on people. If I just kind of see you and I go, oh, John, you just do great work. You go, okay, thanks. What exactly? Have you read any of my books? Have you seen my podcast? Have you read any of my articles? No, just great work, John. Just great work. It's just like, it's relatively meaningless. So what we find, we analyzed really what the behaviors of these great leaders, especially during crisis times. And so some of the things that they do is they, for example, look for small wins. Instead of just saving up their appreciation. And this is one thing Ken Chenault of American Express told us. He says, as I traveled around my system, he says, I would come back to the office every single day and I would start sending out notes, whether handwritten or typed in or text notes. I would make sure I was rewarding people for, thank you for giving me that idea today. I love the way you're doing this. And he was known for this, sending out dozens of missives every day to keep his people encouraged. Another one that we saw a lot was that in great teams, it's not just top-down appreciation, gratitude. They build this peer-to-peer network. Zappos, Tony Hsieh, the CEO there, we'd interviewed, and he told us, I've got 7 gratitude sort of programs in my organization. 6 of them are peer-to-peer. We're supposed to be recognizing each other as peers. One of my favorites was the beginning of each staff meeting. They call them, instead of huddles, they call them zuddles, because they put Z's in front of everything. Example.
Yeah.
And they do what they call snaps recognition. So, John, you had an angry customer calling, you turned them around. Hey, that's what great customer service is all about. Let's all give John some snaps, and they all snap their fingers, right? Silly, but it's something that works for them. So we find this in great teams, that they build this culture where they have each other's backs.
And that is so important, and I think that's fundamental to gratitude. It's the humanity of us all, and what you're doing is recognizing us. I love the idea of the peer-to-peer gratitude. I have something I call the culture of service, creating the culture of service, which is essentially, I think, what you're addressing. Whereas it's intended acts of kindness, but Adrian, how can I be a better colleague to you? I'm not a meddler, but do you need help with this? Or I'm there. Are you seeing that kind of behavior?
Absolutely. It's interesting because now we've surveyed more than 1 million people for our books. And as we study what really is really, there are different things that are appreciated by a manager to an employee to employee. A manager is looking for somebody with talent, with drive, with the ability to create results. Those aren't the things that peers are looking for in each other. What they're looking for are just the things you talked about. They're ideas like service, dependability, reliability. Do you have my back? If I need somebody to pick up a shift, will you be there for me? And so they're very different things, and they also fulfill very different needs in us as an employee. If you are my manager and you recognize me, I know that you're seeing the value I create. But if you're my peer and you recognize me, it's actually even more valuable because I know that you see what I'm doing behind the scene. See, those 1,000 things that I've done that nobody's ever said thank you for.
Absolutely. One of the things why your work resonates is not only, I mean, you ticked off some big name folks that you speak to, but your survey work really does the grunt work of talking what, the people who are doing the work on the front lines are talking about. And that's what gives your work some credibility. So when we talk about, when you focus on lead with gratitude, you become the voice of the employee.
Yeah, when we first wrote our first books 20 years or so ago, and thank you for saying that, they were more allegorical. They were more based on the work we were doing with clients. And what we found is when we started bringing research, some really heavy research into our books, and we don't spend the entire book on that, but when we set it up with research saying, look, here's the hard numbers. This is what people are feeling. These are the correlators that can drive higher levels of engagement. We found our work was a lot more respected and covered in the big financial publications. And so you have to provide evidence. So I'm guessing most of the people listening here are believers. They're believers in grace. They're believers in gratitude. The question is how you get people perhaps above you or beside you who don't really buy in to really believe. And you have to approach this like, you're an attorney making a case. Here's the data. Here's the case studies. Here's the stats, and here's how it can affect us. And let's give this a try. Because what I find is that, and you probably notice the same with your work, when you start this, it's amazing how much your employees are rooting for you to make those changes. There's a reason every night, people tune in to Gordon Ramsay on Fox. I think he's got every show on that network because we love to see the turnaround. We love to see the transformation. Same with our bosses, right?
Yeah, and that's important. And I think what it gets down to, what strong cultures come to, and that you guys are recognized for your work in culture, it comes down to connectedness and a sense of belonging. Mm-hmm. And would you say that gratitude facilitates a sense of belonging? So,
yeah, one of the things that's really interesting is that right now we hear a lot from some managers who tell us, look, this new generation, whether it's millennials or Gen Z coming in, they just want so much recognition, too much gratitude. But what we find is, and we've interviewed, especially for our latest books here, Leading with Gratitude, and we've got a new one coming out. What we find is that these younger employees tell us, look, no, I don't want hollow pats on the back. What I'm looking for is direction. Because I have grown up my entire life with people telling me when I did a good job. It helped me reinforce and help me understand that I was on the right path. So if I do not hear gratitude for the work I'm doing, I will assume I'm on the wrong path and I will change up what I'm doing. That's a change from how you and I grew up, John, when people told us, look, we'll tell you if you're messing up, otherwise just keep doing what you're doing. That's what we assumed, right?
Right.
Mom and dad would come to our soccer games or our football games and they'd go, it was okay, and that's not how this generation has grown up. And so this is a really important point for managers to grasp, is that if you're not using gratitude with especially your younger employees, they are going to assume they're doing something wrong.
You raise such a good point, because when you, what we're talking about is feedback or feed forward, as our friend Marshall Goldsmith taught us. What it really comes down to is it lays gratitude, I would say, lays a foundation for you to give constructive advice, constructive criticism.
Absolutely. And who do you take advice better from? If I'm built up by somebody and now and then they take their arm around me and say, okay, Adrian, you got to do this a little differently. Who am I going to take, advice better from? Somebody like that, or somebody who just beats me and is correcting and then now and then says, oh, by the way, good job on that.
Yeah.
You know, we've got to change the way we're thinking. What we find is that we have to, now it can't be hollow again. Hollow praise creates narcissists. We find that in raising children. Sometimes people tell me, oh yeah, no, if you just praise so much, you'll create narcissists. And some really fascinating studies have been conducted that actually show that when praise is hollow, it can actually create that. You tell little Johnny, oh, you're just the best. You're just the best artist, and you're the most handsome. That is not positive. But if you're recognizing and being grateful for what they really are contributing, then you build positive self-esteem. And we do it in kids, and we also do it as leaders in our employees.
That's a very powerful thought, the positive self-esteem, and what you're talking about, and why, from a leadership standpoint, it's reinforced by being specific. Adrian, I liked what you did with this team, and maybe reference a problem you solved or confrontation, how you handle it. You want to speak to that? So
I think, yeah, that idea of specificity is just vital in this idea of gratitude. And those great leaders we talked about, they would tell us things like, I've learned very early in my career, you can't just walk through the place with good job, good job. In many cases, one CEO told us, he says, look, before I go to any location, he says, I will have either whether it's the manager there or the HR department, give me a list of who's done something great lately. And so as I'm walking around, they go, oh, Deb, didn't you develop that new freight consolidation system? That is amazing work. And he says, people would just lift, that's, he says, how I brought gratitude into a very specific attitude versus just walking through, just saying, oh, you guys in design, you guys are awesome.
Yeah.
It means nothing.
You know what? I'm so glad you mentioned that story, because what it tells me is our leaders, and we know the good ones, they do their homework. Tell me the stories of what's happening. And other than, none of us want to hear platitudes. We put platitudes on walls and forget about them. But, I like the specificity just resonates. And people, the thing is, they'll go home and they'll tell their spouses, their families that, hey, the boss said to me, called me out. I mean, You've got that person. They will go through walls for you.
Oh, absolutely. And that's actually interesting. You bring sort of the home up too. The last third of Leading with Gratitude, we talk about taking this home, because sometimes, and I'm coaching a fellow, I just chatted with him yesterday, who admitted to me, he says, I give my best self at work. By the time I get home, I just want to watch TV and veg out. And he realized that he wasn't giving his best self to the people who probably should mean the most in his life. So we talk a lot about in the book as well, and give a lot of Baker's Dozen, 13 different ideas of how we can be more grateful to those people who are perhaps mean the most to us, our family, our closest friends in our lives.
Great. Give us a couple examples, and you can reference the book if you want, because we haven't spoken enough in this show about the home life. And I think all of us most of the viewers here are working from home. And so home is becoming an all-encompassing concept. So how do we show more gratitude to those we care about the most?
Yeah, and there are lots of ideas that we offer, in the book. One of my favorites came to us from a fellow named Dave Kirpin, who runs a big marketing firm in New York. And he says, we have dinner together, and then the pandemic hits, and he says, I started realizing our dinner discussions were the same. He says, I asked my kids, how was your day? Fine. What'd you do? Nothing. No matter what they were doing, that's the answer, right? And he says, so we changed it up, and he says, I brought gratitude into the dinner conversation. He says, so I asked 3 questions now of all my family members. And he says, the first question is, what was the best part of your day? And they have to think about that. The second is, who are you grateful for who's not at the table, and why? And third, who are you grateful for who's at the table who hasn't been thanked yet? 3 simple questions. And he says, we do it every time we sit down for dinner. He says, at first, my kids crazy hated this. They thought it was the stupidest thing they'd ever done. He says, within a couple of weeks, they were saying, hey, Dad, when are we going to do dinner? I've got some ideas. And he says it's now part of their tradition. So it's who they are. And it helps them, just go into the dinner experience with a more positive, lift in who they are.
And you know what you've done, and this is fundamental. That story resonates with the core concept that you and Chester work with, and that's, excuse me, engagement. Which is, and that's the holy grail of an organization, is to get engagement, and it doesn't. And so, how does gratitude facilitate engagement? So.
When we go into work with an organization, as you mentioned earlier, Chester and I, we do a lot of culture work, whether it's giving a speech, workshops, or consulting. So we'll go into an organization, and typically they want to spike their engagement levels. And what we typically say is there's a few simple things you can do immediately that are going to make an impact. One of them is giving employees a voice. We've found that is probably one of the strongest correlators to engagement. The other one is having a more grateful culture, is being able to recognize people for their value they're creating. And that's, again, it's not just hollow thank yous. It's actually being able to spot the value that's being created within your team, and then finding ways to tailor the gratitude in a very specific way. Because you're not going to recognize me the same as you would yourself, John, or Chester, or Marshall. We're all very different. And so that's what we find, is that actually gratitude is one of those low-hanging fruits, can really make a difference in your employee engagement score.
Right. Well, it's actually reassuring. And I think the backstory of this is it doesn't cost anything. And so and that's how you, and you said something about when you first work with a company, they want to, quote, spike their engagement scores. Well, that's kind of the wrong attitude. They're playing the numbers game, and gratitude and culture and richness, it's the connectivity we feel, which is not so much measured in metrics. It's what we feel.
And that's a great point, because you're right. Because when we come in and somebody says, look, I want to increase my employee engagement scores, the biggest question is why? What's the benefit there? Is it because it's the right thing to do? Is it because you want to see a better number because somebody on the board of directors doesn't like your number? What is it? Typically, we have to bring them back to, you're really creating a culture here. And this is your legacy as a leader. What are you creating? And how do you create something where people are going to love coming into work every day and give their all? That's the idea of, our book, All In. How do you create that culture? And what we found in our research for that book, you can't just focus on engagement. You have to also make sure that people feel enabled at work, that they're supported, they have the right empowerment and training, etc. And also they have high levels of energy. But especially in these tough times, all of our energy levels are ebbing. So how do you keep energy levels high as well?
Right. Well, we're coming toward the end of our show, and I always ask our guests to an example of grace in their lives, or of someone close to them, or someone with whom they've worked. So give me an example, Adrian, of where grace made a difference. So.
Yeah. Thanks. And I love your work around grace, John, because it does remind us all to bring more humanity and compassion into the workplace. So one of the things that jumped into my mind was Texas Roadhouse is one of our clients, and amazing, 80,000 employees, has been the most popular restaurant, just recently named by Nation's Restaurant News during the pandemic. So extremely well-run organization. And in our work, we've had a chance to listen in on many of their senior leadership calls, and we provide a little bit of guidance here and there, but mostly we learn. And after Father's Day, the Monday after Father's Day, we were on the call, and their computer system had gone down during Father's Day. And what was really interesting is their COO running the meeting. He started the meeting, he says, look, I know we lost our systems. Who knows how many orders were lost, and we had some angry customers. We know that. It was a bad day yesterday. We had to scramble with all our computer systems going down. He says, and the CIO was on the call. He says, but I don't want any finger pointing. I don't want anybody to lay blame at nobody wanted this to happen. And I appreciate all of our technology folks scrambling to come in on Father's Day and fix us and get us back up and running. So let's spend our next hour together brainstorming about how we can improve and how we can make sure that we learn from this and treat it as a learning opportunity. And off they went. And it was a really positive hour spent thinking about, okay, can we do a duplicate system? Can we do all these things that they started brainstorming?
Sure.
And I thought afterwards, the CIO in many companies would have been on the hot seat. Our system went down. We lost perhaps hundreds of thousands of dollars in orders. How could you let this happen?
Yep.
But that's not what happened. They made it a learning opportunity by using grace, and it was terrific.
That's a wonderful and powerful example, and it's kind of like curb your recrimination, if you will, borrowing from a show of mine that I like, Curb Your Enthusiasm. Curb that recrimination, because you can embarrass people for a mistake, but why? I mean, how much better to treat them with the respect, and hey, and the big thing is we got to solve this, and we're not going to solve it individually. We have to do it together. So.
Exactly. And I'm not going to bring you any other problems if you belittle me in front of everybody. Yeah, we've got to accept that things happen, and you're assuming positive intent.
Absolutely, and it's so powerful. Adrian, this has been great. How can people find you and your work? So,
well, we're books are sold wherever fine books are sold. Leadingwithgratitudebook.com actually has a bunch of free giveaways, and so if you go log in there, you'll find a bunch of free stuff if you send in some information. So we'd love to connect with you on LinkedIn or leadingwithgratitudebook.com.
Oh, great. And there's also adriangostick.com. So,
exactly. Yeah.
Great. So thank you very much. You've been a great guest, and I appreciate the example you're setting for all of us.
Thanks, John.